Nation, we're back. Welcome to the Droopy Whiskey channel where we're dropping some more Heaven Hill goodness tonight. This is going to be a much shorter video than the one I released last Monday. Whatever, the last video I released, which was all about what you should buy from Heaven Hill Distillery. This one is a much more focused video talking about Elijah Craig, specifically answering the question, what is the deal with Elijah Craig recently? If you like this video, get down, smash the thumbs up button, the like button, subscribe, the whole 9 yards. There's cool stuff in the show notes. Let's move on, okay? We're talking about Elijah Craig barrel proof, specifically batches A121 and B121 in relationship to C920. So this year's first two batches against last year's absolute banger of C920. I want to thank William Wiley for sending me A121 and B521, like total dog, super dank. Thanks, William. You're the man. Now, so just a brief backstory. There are other videos on YouTube about this whiskey already. This one, B521. Yep, this one. And I was compelled to make a video, not because there haven't been valuable things said about it. In particular, I think Matt Porter is right on about this whiskey. He's over at ADHD Whiskey. You can check him out. But Matt's in the minority. We go back to when this whiskey first dropped, media samples sent out to people who media samples get sent out to. And Fred Minnick does a review in which he drops an absolute massive steaming dump on batch B521, which it was such a horrendous review, horrendous being Fred disliked it so much, not that Fred did a horrendous job, but it was almost out of character for Fred. It was like, really, dog? Can it be that bad? And so that was my approach. I was super skeptical. Could it be that bad? Is batch B521 the steaming dump that Fred Minnick and many others on the tube said it was? Okay, not now. That's probably a little bit dramatic, because not everybody was saying it was a steaming dump. Others are just saying, like, you know, it's not very good, not what we come to expect. And so I'm like, well, what have we come to expect? And what are we qualifying or not as good, or like quantifying? How do we... Are we sure that we're doing this whiskey justice? My inclination was no before I tasted it. Then I tasted it, and if you want to, like, I'll do a brief overview of the tasting I did with these three whiskeys at the end of this video after I finish my hot take here. So my first question is, what are we comparing it to? Well, in a lot of cases, we're comparing it to batch C920 or batch B520. This is A121. C920 or B520, which are phenomenal. I mean, these are editions of Elijah Craig barrel proof that stand up against George T. Stagg. I mean, they're whiskey of the year candidates, and we got 2 of them last year. So let's just stop and let's think about that for a moment. This release, which retails for $70, and you can get it at retail. We had 2 editions last year that were so freaking good. Both were in a lot of people's considerations for whiskey of the year. Okay. Now we turn the calendar page into 2021. And we get A121, and we get B521, and you would expect them. I mean, you have to expect that they're not going to be as good as the world-class, like, total game changers that we saw in B520 and C920. Like, it's just hard to hold that bar. Not only that, not only are these batches A121 and B521 suffering from the comparison, B521 in particular is suffering from proof bias. This is my contention, is that a lot of bourbon geeks, we love bourbon due in part to the fact that we love intense flavors. We like bourbon and American whiskey as opposed to Irish whiskey or Scotch because of flavor intensity. So if this is, I could do a whole video on that, and I will at some point. I think that is in part why we like these whiskeys. So we then tend to like higher proof stuff because we're just turning up the intensity. So when we're used to Elijah Craig that's dropping at 125 proof plus, often in the low 130s, sometimes up to 140, and then you throw one at us that's 118.2, and we see that before we taste it, we might go like, oh, come on, that's not really what I want out of Elijah Craig. You know, I'm expecting something that's going to kick me square in the teeth hole. So there's some bias problems against the proof before you even taste the whiskey. Then you taste the whiskey, L'Chaim. I don't have water. It's my first taste of the day. It's not as bad as I'm reacting. It's just still intense, particularly if you have a virgin palate in the moment. There are a couple things that this particular batch has in the profile that makes it slightly different from a lot of the other Elijah Craig barrel proof batches we've seen. One being the flavors are dark. It's not super fruity. I think I get some fruit in it, but it's not super fruity and it's not super sweet. We've been getting some big cherries and we've been getting a crap ton of sweetness out of Elijah Craig products. This one doesn't have as much, but it does have a lot of really interesting, what I'm going to call dark notes. One of them being pipe tobacco, one of them being molasses. I get dark roasted coffee in here, which I don't get a lot of coffee in Elijah Craig. There's plenty, even a lot of barrel character, barrel char. Fred Minnick said it tastes like burnt wood. Makes sense because bourbon's aged in burnt wood. Most bourbon does taste like burnt wood. I think what Fred's articulating a little bit is that it has a drying character to it. This is not the most viscous release of Elijah Craig in the whole wide world. It does have a slightly drying, slightly charcoaly finish, but it doesn't taste like Elijah Craig toasted. It doesn't taste over oaked. It just tastes really oaked. To me, it's it's black pepper, kind of a black pepper spicy finish, following notes of pipe tobacco, like high quality pipe tobacco. We're not talking about cigarettes, molasses, dark roasted coffee. Like this is an after dinner bourbon. Actually, in my opinion, this is an after all the other bourbons bourbon. The flavor profile and what you're able to pick up out of this whiskey depends so much on what you've had already in the day. So if I just drink this straight away, the dark notes, the char and the tobacco and the coffee hit me pretty hard in the palate. That said, if I've already had a sip of a barrel proof whiskey, or maybe I had a dram or two that evening and I go to this as my nightcap, I get loads more sweetness than if I just hit this one straight out of the gate. Two other things I'd say about this before we talk about taste comparisons with the other two batches. This would be awesome with a cigar. I get so much pipe tobacco notes out of this. I think it would make an exquisite pairing with a cigar. I don't even smoke cigars that much. Last thing I'd say here is the flavor profile is very reminiscent of well-aged Jim Beam. It's very reminiscent of some of the older Beam stocks, probably Beam, that we've seen hit through private bottlings recently. The 15-year tanked juice. This kind of tastes like that. Is it that? No, probably not. That's probably Old Beam. But what I have noticed is that Old Beam and Old Heaven Hill taste very, very similar. Like a well-aged Elijah Craig against a well-aged Knob Creek. Do it blind. Tell me it's easy to tell the difference. I do find Heaven Hill to be slightly fruitier, Beam to be slightly nuttier, but sometimes you can get certain barrels that cross the aisle. This is more in that funky Beam family for me. You could put that in a Knob Creek single barrel 13-year store pick. Tell me it was Knob and I'd be like, oh, yeah, okay, I'm here for that. So in short, do I think that the deal with the hate on Elijah Craig batch B521 is warranted? No, it's absolutely not warranted. Is it C920? No, it's absolutely not C920. It has some really interesting characteristics that C920 doesn't have. Therefore, I will reach for it on evenings when I might not reach for C920, depending on what I'm wanting in my palate. It's a really good whiskey, people. And I'd say it bats above its proof point. It's pretty intense. It's not super chill. So if you're just like, it's low proof, it's not for me. It's not low proof. It's 118 proof, and it's full of flavor, and it's got plenty of heat. So I think you'll be fine. Now let's talk about flavor comparisons. I did a large tasting where I tasted A, which I think is this one. Let's get these in order. Okay, I tasted C920 up against A121 and B521. And I'm gonna read you, I have them right here. I'm gonna read you the taste comparison just because it would take me too long to do it again, and I'm trying to make this video shorter. So let's go. B521, I already talked to you about the notes. I also got some barbecue sauce, the smoky, sweet, molassesy, like beef jerky kind of vibe. I dig it. Dig it on a summer evening around a campfire, or like I said, with a cigar. It lacks viscosity. It's kind of like the top of the creme brulee, the caramelized sugar, the burnt sugar, very dark flavors. Yeah, so that's it. That comparing it with A121. A121 was nice, but kind of a one-note wonder. Didn't have a bunch of layers. What it did have was a lot of maple syrup, which I'm digging on this maple syrup note if I can find it. Doesn't taste artificially aged. It's not overly sweet, but very mapley. And the nose on it is super perfumey too. This is gonna sound off-putting, but it's what it reminded me of. You know, it's like when you walk into Hollister at the mall, which I did when I was 17. I don't do it now. Cut me some slack, but I was, I'm a preppy boy. So I would go into Hollister, and Hollister has a very musky, perfumey smell. So does this whiskey. Maple note's nice. It hits you. You get some cinnamon. It reminds me of French toast. Toasty maple with cinnamon. Yeah, French toast all over. Beyond that, though, I don't get too much. That maple sits and lingers. Like, wow, okay, that's there. I don't get much darker notes, and I don't get like anything in the way of fruit, even less than I got in B521. That said, is A121 worse? Worse than B521? No, it's not. It's just slightly different. One's more mapley, one's slightly darker, and the coffee, molasses, tobacco. Like, the palate's really rich. If I had to pick a fruit in it, I would say dates. Like, very, very sweet. And that's kind of sweet maple. Kind of similar to B521, not super viscous, a little bit drying. But nice. Then we did C920. Remember where I put my glasses. Real quick though, A121 was 61.8% alcohol, so 123.6 proof, still lower for an Elijah Craig barrel proof release. Then C920 was 132.8 proof, which is kind of classic for Elijah Craig barrel proof release. Now, what did I mention about this one already? It's amazing. I love it so much. So I'm bringing plenty of bias to this one. But even with the bias, like, I need to own, it's not fair to compare C920, which I thought was a world-class, best of the year kind of whiskey, to these. Are these best of the year whiskeys? No. Are they really, really good $70 whiskeys? Heck yeah, they are. No doubt. C920, we're pulling butter and sugar, rich buttercream frosting, a lot of sweetness, cherries, maraschino cherries, so like marinated, dark, with some bitters, kind of like old-fashioned notes. It's a caramel latte up front, and then it's a dense vanilla sheet pan with buttercream frosting as it sits on the palate. And then it feels like it starts evaporating, and then you get like, oh, this is kind of fall vibes now. You get pepper, allspice, a lot of clove, big clove on the finish, and plenty of oak. I mean, this C920 feels like it was made in a bygone era. I mean, I think this proves that they do make whiskey like they used to. It's so humping good. So that's it. That's what I think the deal is with Elijah Craig Barrel Proof Whiskey right now. It's really, really good. Spend some time with the whiskey before you like publish a review and, you know, claim it's a dumpster fire. I think it's one thing to taste something live and be like, you know, it's not doing it for me, because of course when you taste something one time, there's a pretty good chance it's not going to do it for you. That's the way it goes. But you might come back the next day and you're like, that's pretty good. If you're asking me, which I'm asking me in this moment, Elijah Craig Barrel Proof's always a winner. Had never had a batch where I was like, oh, that was not worth the money. Buy it if you see it. What whiskey, what bourbon should you buy from Heaven Hill? Elijah Craig Barrel Proof. Every single dang time. Nation, I hope you liked the video. As I mentioned, get down and like it. You can check us out, entryproofpodcast.com. You want to support this show and the podcast I run with Brian Bikey over at Abandoned Bourbon, go to patreon.com/entryproofpodcast. Make sure you check out the Drew P. Whiskey channel here on YouTube on Thursday nights, where we do live streams, hang out, chat with us. It's a lot of fun. Check me out on Instagram if you want. That's another place to kind of follow along. I'll go live on there and just share what I'm doing in the day sometimes, at Drew P. Whiskey. All right, y'all. Stay healthy, stay safe. Remember to keep it neat.